Awesome. Okay, so welcome everybody to the U.S. Application Development Partner Community Call. This is our second call that we have. Just some housekeeping notes. We are recording this call, so if you don't agree to be on a recorded call, you can go ahead and drop now. On today's call, we've got a really special guest with us. Mike Hall is going to be talking about bot framework, and we're going to kind of dive right in right after we cover with some announcements. Not sure why my slide just says bot, but it should say bot framework. It's certainly saved that way, but we'll just do a couple of things today. We'll talk about some of the community roundup stuff, then we'll dive right into the meat, and then we'll come back and talk about some final announcements for the next month. We talk about community roundup stuff, and we talk about community. Some of the things that have been going on lately, you've seen two of the data center announcements come online. We certainly are excited about those. Germany and Australia have had some Azure data centers come online recently, so certainly want to check those out. And we've just announced that we're opening another Azure data center in Europe, in France. So some really exciting announcements when it comes to that. The second announcement and the second thing that we wanted to just kind of highlight is if you're using media services today and you're using it for OCR, we've certainly had some complications, or we've certainly complicated things a little bit when it came to how we indexed all the information from the OCR. We've worked to simplify that on the Azure platform, so we've got some simplified data that comes out of the OCR context. And then finally, the third thing is certainly a popular topic that a lot of people have asked us about, is the progress on Azure Stack. This week we've announced that the technology preview 2 for Azure Stack is now available. So certainly want you guys to check those out. We'll have links to all those announcements. We'll post on the Yammer group whenever we finish this call. Like I said, this call is recorded, and we're going to post it in the Yammer group along with the decks afterwards. So if you're looking for any of the content that we may talk about today, we're gonna post that information after the call on the Yammer group, which we highly encourage you guys to participate in if you haven't already. We'll certainly have links to that after the call today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to talk about bot framework and dive in.
Okay, I'm just sharing my desktop. Let me know when you can see it.
Awesome. Sure can.
Okay. So the presentation today is going to be in two parts. The first part is a slide deck where I'll talk about bot framework and some of the related technologies to bot framework. And then we'll take about 10 minutes to build a bot from scratch, which will include a number of different technologies and show you how the pieces fit together. Okay, so let's dig in. Okay, well, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Mike Hall. I'm a principal architect in the Microsoft Research New Experiences and Technologies group, which includes the bot framework team. So let's talk about building a bot. What exactly is a bot? Well, if we boil it down to the bare minimum, a bot is a piece of code that executes on the web somewhere, is web accessible, very important, and is in effect written in JavaScript or C#, and accepts a JSON package as a message and returns a JSON package as a reply message. So in effect, you could build a bot using any language, any framework, but we simplify the model by providing software development kits for primarily two languages, JavaScript and C#, and we'll get into more of the details of that in a second. So in effect, your bot is a piece of code that receives a message and can send one or more messages. But when you think about bots, you think about conversation and conversational user experience. So let's start with a description of the typical conversation flow that happens when you're talking to a bot. In general terms, you can think about 4 different styles of conversation that happen between a user and a bot. The first of which is pure question and answer. So you can imagine a bot that you can ask questions about the weather. So you might ask, will it rain in Seattle tomorrow? And the answer might be yes or no. Or you might ask, will I need a jacket tomorrow? or similar types of questions where you ask a question and the bot responds with an answer to that specific question. The second form of conversation might be more of a directed conversation. In this case, the bot might start by asking you questions to determine which direction you want the conversation to go, and continue to ask questions until you get to some kind of resolution. An example here might be something like a banking bot, where the banking bot might welcome you and then tell you, I can help with mortgages, loans, credit cards, and something else. Which of these 4 options would you like help with? And depending on the channel that you're connected to, and by channel I mean messaging services like Facebook and Skype and Slack and GroupMe and Telegram and others, that user experience may be simply rendered as buttons that you can click, so it makes navigation very fast. The third type of conversation is what you'd classify as form filling. So you can imagine an insurance bot or a pizza ordering bot that has a number of fields that need to be completed before the bot can do some work. You'd like to order a pizza. Do you want small, medium, and large? Do you want one of our standard pizzas or a custom pizza? What toppings do you want? Would you like breadsticks? This is all part of the conversation flow, but under the hood, you can easily imagine that this is very similar to a web form that needs to be completed before you hit submit. The fourth type of conversation is fully open conversation, where the user can ask anything, and there tend to be a very small number of agents that deal with this type of workflow. You can imagine Cortana, Siri, OK Google, Alexa, and then at that point you start to run dry on agents or bots that handle wide open conversation that are not tied to a specific domain. So most bots that people build tend to be domain specific: weather, stock, news, insurance, pizza ordering, these kind of things. And if you start to ask questions that are outside of the domain, the bot will simply say, I don't understand, right? You know, I can tell you about the weather or ordering a pizza, but I don't know anything about the stock market, right? So when people are building bots, they tend to use the first 3 conversation styles: question, answer, directed conversation, or form filling, and not necessarily just one of the 3, but mixing and matching each of these 3 conversation styles to build the conversation flow that might exist inside of the bot. So when you think about building a bot, you really need to think about what exactly is the domain that I'm going to be covering with the bot, and what is the user experience and conversational flow that the bot is going to deliver to the user. And then in effect at that point you can think about how you're going to be using those 3 conversation modes to structure the flow of the conversation within your bot. So once you've written bot code, you then decide which channel or which channels am I going to light this bot up on. Many of the conversation channels that exist, and I'm pretty sure each of you have a number of different messaging applications you use: Skype for Business, Skype, Facebook, Slack, GroupMe, Telegram, there's a long list of these things. Many of these development models have their own software development kits. So if you want to develop a bot for Facebook, you can use the Facebook SDK. If you want to develop a bot for, say, Slack, you can use the Slack SDK. The issue there, of course, is that once you've written that bot and you've connected it to that channel, at that point, if you want to then move to a different channel, you need to pick up a different SDK, rewrite your bot on that channel, and then publish on that channel. Any changes you make to your original bot then have to be reflected in the second instance of the bot that you created for the new channel. So that tends to be a lot of work. We'll tell you in just a second how the bot framework solves some of these issues. So not only do you need to understand the domain that you're going into, but for many of these bots, you need to call out to a number of external services. This might include language understanding. The example I gave earlier about a weather bot. If I were to type into a bot, will it rain in Seattle tomorrow? You need some natural language processing technology that is able to break that sentence down into an intent and a set of entities. So the intent will be, tell me if it's going to rain. And then the entities in this case would be a location, Seattle, and a time frame, tomorrow. So using a number of cognitive services, such as the Language Understanding Intelligence Service, or LUIS, gives you the ability to rapidly generate a bot that supports a level of natural language understanding that you don't have to build for yourself. So this is how you build a bot. You generate the bot, you think about the logic flow within your bot, you connect it to various channels that you want to publish the bot on, and you add conversation skills and intelligence to the bot. Feel free to ask questions at any time. Perhaps somebody could flag if there are any questions to me, and we can answer them as we go or wait until the end.
Yeah, I'll certainly do that, but we don't have any questions at this time.
Great. Okay, so there are three things to think about when you're building your bot. The first of which is Bot Builder, or the SDKs. The two SDKs that we have today are JavaScript and C#. So in effect, Node, Node.js, and ASP.NET based bots. When you think about publishing your bot, if you're building a C# bot, Visual Studio makes it very easy for you to publish that bot onto Azure. But there are no hosting requirements for your bot. If you wanted to host on Azure or AWS or your own hosting environment, that's perfectly fine. The only thing that we require is that the bot endpoint that you publish to is web accessible. The bot connector, which is a piece of technology that we've built and is published on Azure, is the piece of code that connects your bot to each of the messaging channels. So that needs to be able to reach the endpoint of your bot. So your bot needs to be published in either a web accessible endpoint, or if it's running inside of your enterprise, you need to use something like ngrok or something similar to be able to forward messages from the public internet to your bot within the enterprise. So when we think about your bot is in effect stateless. It's a web application. It receives an HTTP message, which is a JSON document. It does work, updates that document, and then sends it back to the user. So at that point, in effect, your bot is stateless. So when you think about conversation design, you think about conversation flow, you think about form filling, for example, being able to track which element within the form that your bot is currently on. If you were to write all of this in code by yourself, that could be a huge amount of state that you need to keep track of. Which element, which turn within the conversation is your bot currently on? How do you track that? Especially, how do you track that since you're a single instant bot hosted by Bot Framework, potentially connected to multiple channels and thousands of users per channel? The good news is that the SDKs deal with this for you. So if you generate a form or you request a prompt, do you want to do this? Yes, no. Do you want to order that pizza? Please give me your address. You know, these kind of things. The Bot Framework and SDK will deal with state for the form or dialogue that you're currently on without you in code needing to do that directly. One of the interesting things about building a bot is that you can obviously connect your bot to multiple channels. And it's possible for you to examine the channel that you're on and modify the behavior of your bot based on the channel that you're on. I would recommend, however, that you build your bot independent of knowledge of the channel that you're connected to. Each of the channel adapters, the pieces of code that sit between the bot connector, and we'll see this, I think, actually on the next slide, that sit between the bot connector and the messaging service, will change the behavior of the messaging that you're providing to meet the capabilities of the channel that you're connected to. Let me give you an example. So let's say that you're using something called promptDialog.choice, where you're providing a question and a series of buttons for the user to make a decision on. Do you want to do this or this? Would you like insurance help, mortgage help, or something else? If you're connected to most of the major messaging channels, like Facebook and GroupMe and Skype and Telegram and so on, each of these prompts will be given to you as buttons. So you can simply click them within the messaging application. But if you're on a down-level channel, such as SMS, for example, you're delivering the messages to somebody on their mobile phone, In that case, obviously buttons won't be delivered, but instead a bulleted list will be delivered to the user instead, and they will type the response back, which will then be sent to your bot. So for the most part, you don't need to worry about the channel that your bot is connected to. You write your bot once, you decide which channels to publish on, and then you light up each of those channels. Okay, so that's Bot Builder, Developer Portal. When you have written your bot, so the first thing to note here is that writing a bot, you can choose obviously C# or JavaScript. If you're writing in C#, typically you're going to be using a PC running Windows and Visual Studio 2015. We have an application template that plugs into Visual Studio to give you the initial framework for building your bot. If you're a JavaScript developer, you don't necessarily have to code on a PC. You could obviously use a PC, but you can also use a Mac and Linux to develop your bot as well. One of the tools that we provide as part of the SDK is a bot framework emulator that emulates one of the channels. So you can write your bot completely standalone without publishing onto any of the messaging channels. Test your bot, update your bot, debug your bot, get your bot to the point where you're ready to publish, and then publish and light up on the channels that you want to light it up on. So the developer portal, this is the place that you would go to, botframework.com. You would sign in using your Microsoft account, and then you'll register your bot. And this means that you give your bot a name, you provide the endpoint address for your bot, and you also generate an application ID and an application secret that would need to be given to your bot to secure the messaging channel between the bot framework and your bot. By default, the Skype channel is auto-configured. So when you create a bot, it is turned on the Skype channel. That doesn't necessarily mean that the bot is discoverable on the Skype channel. It means that it gives you a very convenient way to test your bot. You can also invite up to 100 other people to use your bot by sending a Skype link to your bot to these people, and they can use your bot and provide feedback on your bot. We also have a web chat control that you can drop onto web pages that you can light up for your bot as well. And using something called the direct line channel, you can directly embed your bot conversation model into any application on any platform. So if you wanted to write an iOS app or an Android app or a Windows Store app or a WinForms app or a console app that talk to a bot that you've developed, you can use the direct line channel to do that. Okay, and then finally there's the cognitive services. More than 20 services that deal with technologies in a wide range of fields, whether it's face detection, face emotion, language detection, language emotion, language understanding, Bing search. There's a whole range of technologies that make it very easy for you to add intelligence into your bot. Okay, let's talk about building a bot.
Mike, there was a question about storing favorites and storing information for the actual users from the bot. So yes. A good example is kind of like if you wanted to order a pizza, is there a place for you to store favorites, or is ML the cognitive service capabilities that are included able to learn from the location and base it on that information?
Okay, so the question is about storage of user data, conversation state, these kind of things.
Yes, sir.
So the answer is yes, the bot framework does provide that. When you receive a message, a JSON document from a user on a particular channel, you'll get a number of pieces of information within that message. So the obvious one that you would be interested in would be text, which would be the text that the user would type and send to your bot. You know, I would like to order a pizza, for example. But you also get the user identity on that channel. You also get the conversation ID, and you also get other data such as attachments and other pieces that might be interesting. So somebody could upload an image, or they could send you voice data as an attachment. There's a number of things that you can do. The bot framework, as part of the SDK, both for Node and C#, includes something called the State Store API. And this is interesting for two reasons. The first of which is that each of the built-in dialogue models, whether it's a prompt, yes, no, okay, cancel, or form filling to understand which element you're on and the current data that has been entered on that form, all use the state store to store their current state. So there are APIs within the SDK that you can use at the user level or at the conversation level to store your own data within that state store. The state store also provides an override model. By default, we store your state encrypted as part of Azure Table Storage. However, if you wanted to use your own storage model, you can override state store within your bot, continue to use the exact same APIs to store and retrieve state, but ultimately that would call code that you've written to store it wherever you want to store it, whether that's a local SQLite table or in Azure SQL Storage or somewhere else. So yes, state can be stored within your bot, and you have full control over where that state gets stored. Okay, so back to the bot. You start by writing your business logic. What exactly does your bot do? Once you have that, you then connect your bot up to the bot connector. Typically, when you're writing a bot, you need to add some kind of additional services, whether that's a call out to NOAA to retrieve current weather, or to call the Yahoo stock service to get the current stock value of a particular ticker name, or something else. But you may also want to add natural language understanding to your bot. So there's a whole bunch of services, whether they're your own existing enterprise service or third-party public web calls or calls out to the Microsoft Cognitive Services. Each of these potentially enhance the behavior of your bot. So you decide as a developer exactly which service or services you want to light your bot up on. By default, as I've mentioned, you get Skype for free, but you could turn that off, but it gets turned on by default. But then for each of the additional services, whether it's Facebook or Telegram or GroupMe or Kik or text or email, you decide which of these channels you want to light up for your bot. And this isn't a one-time deal. If you want to, 3 months from now, once your bot has been tested on a particular channel, turn on a different channel, you just go back to botframework.com, go to your bot, and then just turn on another channel. So it's relatively easy to be able to do this. Okay, so SDKs. As I've mentioned, we have two, one for JavaScript, Node.js, and the second one being C#.NET. Is it possible for you to write a bot using any other language? For example, if you wanted to use Python or PHP or something else. The answer is yes, you could. The issue there, of course, is that you would need to deal with serialization and deserialization of the messaging format that is delivered to your bot. The SDKs that we provide give you a huge amount of value by providing support for built-in prompt types, whether that's yes, no, or entering a string, or choices, or filling in forms, these kind of things. These are built into the SDK. Unfortunately, if you were to use your own language, your own framework, these things would obviously not be built in, so you would need to write these for yourselves. The bot framework also includes support for a number of different UI controls, whether that's buttons or hero cards or carousels. These kind of things are supported directly by the SDKs. So it's very easy for you to build a very rich conversation flow, either using just text, text and buttons, text, buttons, and images, or potentially full carousels, where you have images that are scrollable that also include action buttons as part of these as well. One thing to note is that both SDKs, the JavaScript and C# SDK, are both fully open source on GitHub. There's a fairly thriving community of people that are wanting to enhance or add features to the SDKs, and there's a growing set of samples both for C# and for JavaScript that show you how to complete some of the common tasks that you might be interested in when using the bot framework. For example, creating a new form and then handing off to the SDK to allow that form to be completed. So I'd certainly recommend that you go take a look at the samples and the documentation that are part of the bot framework SDK. developer portal. So we've already mentioned this, but this is kind of what it looks like. So this is the place you would go to, botframework.com, where you would register your bot, give us the endpoint address for your bot, generate your application ID in secret to secure the channel to your bot. You can also test your connection to the bot. So once it's been registered, in the image of this web page, bottom left-hand corner, you can send a message to your bot, and if everything is configured correctly, you should get a message being sent back. So you can also manage your bot, turn your bot on and off, and you can also publish to the bot directory as well. So this is what the bot directory looks like. You can go to this right now, botframework.com, and then in the top header, click on bot directory, and there's a growing set of bots that have been published here that you can play with. I think one of the favorites is shown middle left on this page, which is MurphyBot. So you can ask questions like, what would Satya Nadella look like with a beard? And it will generate an image based on Bing image search of Satya with a beard. So that's kind of interesting. So go play with that. Once you've written your bot, you make a decision whether you want to publish on the bot directory. Why is it useful to do that? Well, if you click on one of these bots, you'll see a number of add links there. Add to Skype, add to Telegram, add to other channels. Since many of these bots also support the web channel, the web control, you can try out the bot directly on the bot directory without having to add the bot to one of your messaging platforms as well. Okay, so that's bot directory. Let's talk briefly about cognitive services, and then once we've done that, we'll spend a few minutes taking a look at actually building a bot from scratch. So cognitive services breaks down into a number of different areas. Vision, for example. Vision isn't necessarily video, but can also include still images. If any of you saw the keynote from Ignite last week, you may have seen a video from Uber, where Uber are using some of these cognitive services to verify the identity of their drivers before they can accept any fares by having the driver take a selfie image and uploading that to Uber. And then Uber will use the Cognitive Services Face Recognition API to verify that that is the driver of that vehicle before starting to send them jobs for the day. So vision, pretty interesting. Speech. Speech includes not only speech to text and text to speech, but there are some very interesting APIs that exist here. For example, you may be using Skype Translator to have real-time conversations, language to language. For example, you may speak German, but you might be talking to somebody who speaks Spanish. You speak in German, they hear Spanish. They speak in Spanish, you hear German. Very interesting technology. And the underlying technology for that is also exposed as an API as part of the cognitive services set. So the ability to support real-time conversational speech translation is given to you as an API within cognitive services for you to do some super interesting things either within a bot or generically within any type of application that you want to build. The cognitive services aren't necessarily just tied to bot framework development. You can use all of these APIs in your own application as well. Language, super important for building conversational agents. And when we talk about language, you can do a number of things. You can not only parse natural language, meaning dealing with inputs such as will it rain in Seattle tomorrow, but you can also extract sentiment from language as well. So as your users are using your bots, you can determine while they're using the bot how happy or sad they are or angry based on the content that they're typing into your bot, and potentially use that to modify the behavior of your bot real time, or potentially to bring a human into the conversation when you detect that a user of your bot is struggling to complete a task that they need within their bot. Knowledge, whether this is searching your own data or searching academic papers or other knowledge sets, and also using many of the Bing search APIs to search for web articles, images, videos, or trending news. So there are more than 20 different API sets that exist here that allow you to build some very interesting bots and conversational models for your bot. So here are each of the APIs broken down into a table, so you can see how each of these kind of might be used. On the left-hand side, face, for example, for face detection, or gender and age detection. By being given an image, can you detect male, female, and approximate age? Speech recognition, language understanding in the middle section, knowledge exploration or academic search, and then on the far right side, image search, Bing web search, these kind of things. So wide range of services, fantastically interesting APIs, very easy to use. Certainly recommend adding these as appropriate to any bot that you would build. Okay, so at this point I will step into building a demo, but I'll pause just for a second to see if there are any questions about anything that we've covered so far.
No questions yet.
Okay, in that case, let's jump out of PowerPoint and jump into Visual Studio. Okay, so this is Visual Studio 2015. I've already installed the bot framework app template, and you can simply download this from botframework.com. I've also installed the bot framework emulator, which we'll see in just a second when we start using our bot. So I'm sure if any of you are Visual Studio developers, this seems like a very natural thing to do, file, new, application, and I'm on C# and I'm choosing bot application. I'm going to go with the default name of bot application 15. Why not? And this will generate the base code for the bot. Now, before we get into looking at the code, modifying code, doing something interesting with the bot, there are a couple of things that I want to point out about the code that is generated for the bot. The first thing is that we have this file called web.config, and this has 2 lines in it that are interesting for you when you're building your bot. So by default, the application ID and application secret that are used to secure the channel, communication channel to your bot are empty. This is great when you're doing development on your own PC using the bot framework emulator, but when you publish your bot to a live channel like Skype or Facebook or Telegram or something else, then at that point you'll need to go to botframework.com, register your bot, generate an app ID and an app secret, and those values that you generate on the bot framework registration page get put here. So this is just pointing out to you web.config, these 2 values, go to botframework.com, register your bot, generate the app ID secret, and then drop them in here. So that's the first thing to think about. The second thing to think about is a file that is included within the bot template, which is called default.htm. So when you write your bot and you publish your bot is running as a web service in effect. That means that it's on some public address. Somebody could browse to that public address, and what will they see when they get there? Well, the default app template gives you this very basic HTML page that says, "Hi, I'm bot, and you should probably change this page." One of the first things that I do when I'm creating a bot is register that bot on the web chat channel and then drop the web chat control, which is an iframe, 1 line of code, into this HTML page so that when it's published, I can simply go to its web page and interact with the bot without needing to do anything else. Very useful. For some of the bots that I've published broader than simply test bots, I've included information on how to use the bot, instructions on how to interact with the bot, and the web chat control on this HTML page. Okay, now let's go take a look at the code. So in the controllers folder, there is this file called messagescontroller.cs. There is one function here that is interesting for you as the bot builder. This is a function called post, and post takes in an activity, and you can think of an activity basically being a message. So what this is going to receive is a message from the user on the messaging channel that the user is on. And this could easily be the device emulator, or in quotes, a real channel like Facebook or Telegram or something else. So the first thing that we're going to do is determine, is the type of message that we received a user message? In effect, there are two types of message: user message and system message. So if it's a user message, we'll do something, which we'll come back to in a second. Otherwise, we call a function called handle system message. And the handle system message is part of the generated code as well. So for example, one of the things that you could do that is not lit up by default is deal with conversation update. A bot, depending on which channel it's connected to, could support one-to-one messaging, I'm talking to the bot, or it could also include group messaging. So you could have multiple people part of that bot conversation at the same time. Or flipping it around, you could think about a multi-user group conversation that also includes the bot. So the bot can be notified as users are added or removed from the conversation. As a user gets added, the bot could obviously send a welcome message. Welcome, hey, I'm the bot. I can do these things. Here's how to interact with me. Here's some instructions, or click this link to get help, or whatever else. All right, so there's some system level stuff that you can do, but there's also user message level stuff, which is checking the message type. In this case, we're doing something very simple. We're creating a connector client, and we use that to send a message back to the user. We get the length of the string. So if I type hello, obviously I get 5 back as a number. And then we create a reply message or a reply activity with a string that says you sent the following text, which is this number of characters in length. And then we simply send that message back to the user. So there's very, very little actual work going on here. So now let's build this. So that built correctly. I'm going to run this. What does it mean to run a bot? Well, it's a web service. So when I'm running on my development machine, in effect what this is going to do is spin up IIS Express to host the web service and then launch the default HTML page for the bot. So the bot's now running. I can now launch the emulator for the bot framework. You'll notice there are 2 red items shown on the toolbar at the bot. This is showing that the application ID and application secret are both empty, which is perfectly fine if I'm developing on my local machine and I don't have an app ID and app secret built into my my bot code. So I can type something here, hello, and I should get a message back that says you said hello, and that was 5 characters. Great. So this shows that my bot is working. But at the same time, it's not particularly interesting as a bot. So now let's spend a few minutes adding some additional code, not a huge amount of code, but a small amount of additional code to the bot that then extends the functionality of the bot to do something useful. One of the things I talked about earlier was calling existing web services, whether that's NOAA to get weather information or Yahoo Stock Services to get stock information. So what I'm going to do is add some code to this bot that calls the Yahoo Stock Service and retrieves stock information for a particular ticker. So I can call this class Yahoo. I'm going to remove all of the generated code and just quickly type a small number of lines of code. And actually there's not a whole lot going on here. You can see the endpoint address for the Yahoo Stock Service. I'm using web client to call that web service. The only thing that's missing here is the symbol that I'm interested in, which might be MSFT or AAPL or TSLA or something else, right? So all I'm really doing is calling the stock service, checking the result of calling that service. If I get a null back, then I'm simply saying the stock you gave me doesn't appear to be valid. Otherwise, I'm saying here's the stock and here's the value that I got back. So not a huge amount of code there. Okay, I'm going to save that, come back to the message controller, and then I'll remove the lines of code that generate the string length and a message, and I'll just drop a couple of lines of code in that call the web service that we've just added and generate the reply back to the user. Okay, so let's build that, run that. Okay, there's our web page. Go back to the emulator. I'm going to create a new conversation, so we in effect start from scratch. And now I should be able to give this a stock ticker name, such as MSFT, and I get a value back. If I type something hopefully invalid, I get the message coming back that says that does not appear to be valid. Okay, great. So in a few lines of code, I've taken the bot from really just understanding string length to a bot that can call an existing online web service and return some data. But I think you'll agree that the bot in its current form is not particularly conversational. You'll notice that I didn't type, show me the value of Microsoft stock, but I simply had to know the ticker name that I was interested in, MSFT, or in this case, I didn't have the ability to type in natural language any kind of request. For example, if I had queried Microsoft stock and then 30 minutes later came back and said, how about now? Or show me the value now. Somehow my bot needs to understand what that means. What do you mean, show me that now? You mean the last stock that I was interested in? Well, that means that somehow we need to think about storing that stock, which comes back to a question that somebody asked earlier about how do I store my own state? Why don't we just go ahead and modify this bot again and add in some code to add support for natural language understanding and also for storing state so we can keep track of the last stock that the user was interested in. Okay, what I'm going to do is stop this. I'm going to run HTTP. Actually, I'm going to open the browser and go to lewis.ai. Lewis.ai is the endpoint address for the Language Understanding Intelligence Service, which is one of the cognitive services out of the list of more than 20 that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. So I'm signing in under my Microsoft account, and I've got a number of Lewis models that I've built. This one is called the stock model. On the left-hand side, you'll see an area called intents, and you'll see there's something called repeat last stock. So that gives me the ability to say things like, well, how about now? What's it at now? Show me my last stock, these kind of things. Stock price is simply a query for a number of stocks that I might be interested in, and so on. And entities is ticker symbol. I'm just going to refresh this page because we should see some training data on the right-hand side, which I'm not currently seeing. Ah, there we are. Okay, so what I'm going to do is open up stock price, and this will show you some of the, in quotes, extensive training data that I've added to this model. So you can see that I've typed a number of things. The way you train Lewis is by typing or uploading training data. So in this case, for understanding the stock model, obviously there are thousands of different stock tickers that exist, but I don't need to teach the model about every single one. In effect, all I need to do is teach the model where roughly in a sentence I might find the entity that I'm interested in, or where within the structure of a sentence that might be found. So I can say, tell me the price of, and then I highlighted Tesla as the ticker symbol, or show me the price for Microsoft. Part of the art of building a language understanding model is thinking about the number of different ways in which you could say the same thing. Will it rain in Seattle tomorrow? Do I need an umbrella in Seattle tomorrow? Do I need a jacket in Seattle tomorrow? All of which might result in the same intent, which is an understanding of the weather tomorrow in Seattle. So you can see a number of ways that I've trained this model. For example, show me the value of Microsoft stock. What is the value of Microsoft stock? And so on. So I've only trained this on about 13 items, but this gives me the ability to try out the model. Here is the URL. Hopefully you can see that highlighted for my application, my Lewis application. So I can type things like, show me the value of Microsoft stock. And when I hit enter, this will call the model and return a JSON document that gives me my original text, which we can see here, the intents in highest first. So at 99% is I'm asking for the value of a stock price. And you can see that repeat last stock is just nowhere close, right? Very, very small. For entities, so what did we extract from that sentence? What I got back was the entity was Microsoft, and the type of entity is stock ticker symbol. Okay, with this information, I can now do something very interesting inside my bot. What I'm going to do is add another class, and I'm going to call this Lewis. I'm going to replace that current code with something called a Lewis dialog. Dialogues are pieces of code, for example, a form, that are completely self-contained to deal with user interaction. So I've given the app ID and key for the Lewis model that we were just using, and I have a number of functions here, one called stock price, that is tagged with the Lewis intent from my model. So if I ask, what is the value of Microsoft stock? This function will get hit. I return the first entity, and then I use the state store to store that last stock into the state store. And I then simply call the exact same Yahoo class that we were using a few minutes ago and post a message back to the user. So very little work there to do, in effect, some language parsing, storing state and posting a message to the user. If the user asks to repeat last stock, then we look in the state store to see if there is a last stock. If there isn't one, then we say, I don't have a stock to look up. If there is one, we call the stock model and then post a message back to the user. So very simple. Only one change that we need to make here, which is in the code that talks to our dialog. So we remove the call to conversation.reply. I paste in one line of code which says any message that you receive, send that message to the stock dialog that we were looking at just a couple of seconds ago. Okay, I can build this, I can run this, and I get the web page being displayed. And then I can go back to the device emulator, and with the emulator running, I can say, how about now? So what's this going to do? It's going to try and look up the previous stock that is stored in the state store. Because there is nothing stored in the state store, hopefully I should get a message back that says I don't have a previous stock to look up. So now I can say something that is far more conversational and natural. Show me the value of Microsoft stock. So this gets the value back, right? So great, fantastic. This is far more conversational than simply typing MSFT and me having to know the stock ticker name of the stock that I'm interested in. So let's assume that 30 minutes have gone by, and I come back and say, how about now? So what is my stock at now? This retrieves the stock that we stored in the state store, calls the Yahoo stock service, gets the value back, and then shows it to me. So one of the other cognitive services is language translation. With just a few additional lines of code, instead of me typing, show me the value of Microsoft stock, maybe I type the same thing but in French. So our bot could intercept that text, determine the language that it's being typed in, and call our stock service, get the result back, and then use the translation service to translate our text back into the language of the user, which in this case might be French, and then send that back to the user. So in a few lines of code, we've got conversational state being handled. A few additional lines of code, we could add language translation into the bot. Okay, so that's enough about coding. So let me pause again here for a couple of seconds and see if there are any questions about anything that we covered about building the bot.
No questions.
Okay. All right. So at this point, one additional thing to talk about. So this is obviously a relatively simple bot. It's calling out to a stock service, it's getting a value, it's displaying that to the user. But in most cases, when you're building a bot, you want to understand how people are using your bot, how people are interacting with your bot, how far down the conversation channel people are going with your bot. So for example, if your bot is used to book travel, how many people search for travel, find travel, but don't actually book the travel? If you're a pizza ordering bot, how do you know how many people are getting to the point of ordering but not completing the order? So this is where you start to think about telemetry that might be added to your bot. So having your bot connected to IoT Hub and then a number of similar technologies such as Stream Analytics, machine learning, Azure Functions, and Power BI give you the ability to ask some very interesting questions about how people are interacting with your bots, the type of questions that they're asking, how far through the model of using your bot people are going, which channels they're using, how many messages per conversation are happening within your bot. So this gives you understanding about how your bot is being used. It's relatively simple to add this to your bot. You can also use App Insights to do some very basic monitoring of bot usage as well. My recommendation, always bring this level of support into your bot so you can understand how it's being used at runtime and then tweak the way in which your bot is used based on the data that you're seeing within this model.
Does the AI service have an additional cost, or is that also open source? These I know that these do, like all the machine learning, IoT Hub, and so on. But is that what's included in the AI service? Is that what I'm understanding?
Okay, so the question is, I think, about the cognitive services.
Yeah.
So there are more than 20 cognitive services. Some of the APIs do have a charging model. I'll pull one out. For example, the real-time speech translation API does have a charging model, but you get so many thousand API calls per day for free before you start to hit that charging model. So each API is different. If you go to the Microsoft.com/cognitive services page and click on each API, you'll see what, if any, charging model exists around those APIs. For example, Lewis doesn't have a charging model, but some of the other APIs do.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so that about wraps up the presentation. So what have we seen? For developers, building a bot on the Microsoft Bot Framework gives you the ability to write your bot once. Hugely important. Write your bot once and then publish on each of the channels that you want to light your bot up on. For end users, they obviously get the freedom of using their favorite messaging channel to talk to your bot. And for businesses, don't only think about bots as being an end user consumer type bot. There are a number of bots that have already been developed at Microsoft, in Microsoft, that use the Microsoft Graph and connect to internal services to provide a wide range of skills and conversational models. So don't only think about bots as being consumer focused. They can either expose services for a business or expose services within a business as well. There is an interesting NuGet package which is called AuthBot, which is available to download from NuGet into your C# bot, which provides a way of abstracting Active Directory authentication. So depending on the scope that you require access to within your bot, you could, for example, get access to email, calendar, SharePoint, various other internal services within your organization by being authenticated appropriately against Active Directory, and then you can expose only to authenticated users services within your organization, as well as, but potentially a limited number of services to non-authenticated users as well. Okay, so at that point we're pretty much done. Let's now open it up to any questions that exist.
The only question is somewhat of a partner-facing question, is about ordering those services through CSP. Is there any or are you familiar with CSP?
I have no idea what CSP is.
Okay, we'll follow up. Ryan had a question about that. We'll follow up with that on in the Yammer group, but there are no other questions at this point.
Okay, well, in that case, let me hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Mike. Let me get PowerPoint presenting back up here. Let's see here. See if it'll let me put the original PowerPoint back, or if it's going to want to reload it. Let's see. Just a second. Oop. There we go. Right. Okay. All right. Let me make sure that everything can be seen here, and I have the meeting. But we hope that this was helpful. Let's see. We're still seeing a screen here. Let me see. Oop. Come on. Well, the last thing we were wanting to do today is to cover down on the partner community. If you're not involved, like I had mentioned before, a couple people had asked for the slides afterwards. We're certainly going to make those available through the Yammer group afterwards. We highly encourage you to do that. If you're on this call, you certainly already know about the monthly calls. If you aren't aware of the application development blogs, we certainly want to get you involved there. You can see the link up there, and then we want you to get involved in the Yammer group, where we're going to post a recording for this, as well as any slides that we have made available, and then continue the conversation. If you have questions about any of the stuff we talked about on the call today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us afterwards, and we'll cover down on that. Lastly, as we kind of close things out, we're going to have a couple of poll questions. We really use these as simply a way for us to try and find the best content and help bring additional content like this to you guys. So we'd certainly encourage you to do that. And with that, we're right on time. We'll conclude today's call. Thank you so much for attending, and have a great rest of the day.